Hello and welcome to worship. I would like to start with a song today. I'm so glad Jesus lifted me. I'm so glad Jesus lifted me. I'm so glad Jesus lifted me. Singing glory, hallelujah. Jesus lifted me. When I was in trouble, Jesus lifted me. When I was in trouble, Jesus lifted me. When I was in trouble, Jesus lifted me. Singing glory, hallelujah. Jesus lifted me. And that could have been the song Simon Peter's mother-in-law was singing as she bustled around the kitchen to whip up some lunch for Simon and his friends. Thank goodness they had shown up when they had with that nice young man from Nazareth, that Jesus. If they hadn't come when they had, Lord have mercy, she'd still be in bed with a fever, maybe even dead by now. And then who would serve those boys their lunch? Oh, this little story from Mark's Gospel, I confess to you, it has rubbed me the wrong way at times. This miraculous healing story in which the old woman hops out of bed and begins to serve the men. It's a little cringy, and what's worse, it's that this story has been used more than a few times to show women where their place is. But to read it this way is a huge mistake. This is the Gospel of Mark, who isn't someone to waste words. The entire story is told in 4 whole sentences, pretty stingy even for Mark, but some of the words hold stories of their own. Here it is, translated from the original Greek in the New Revised Standard Version. I give you Mark 1, 29 through 31. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now, Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. Now, the first word we need to unpack is the Greek word egeierin. That's the word that in this version is translated, he lifted her up. A more literal translation is raised. The same word appears elsewhere in the New Testament. Mark uses it later to tell about Jesus raising a little boy who appeared to be dead. John will use that word to describe how Jesus raised Lazarus from his tomb. And the same word will be used many more times by both Luke and Paul in the retelling of Jesus' resurrection story. The word egeierin means so much more than lifting someone up. It conveys the idea of raising someone from the grip of death. The healing of Simon's mother-in-law may very well be the first resurrection story connected to Jesus. And that's what makes her response all the more incredible to me. This woman who was, if not actually dead, then very close to it, is raised up from her deathbed, as it were, and she began to serve them. It almost sounds like the makings of a bad joke, doesn't it? Why did Jesus raise Simon's mother-in-law? Because he wanted lunch? I mean, if I had been there and if that woman had been my own mother or mother-in-law, I would have insisted she stay in bed a while. She wouldn't have been serving a meal on my watch, I tell you that. And I am quite certain that someone like me must have been there that day. A daughter maybe, a daughter-in-law, a kindly neighbor woman. Someone had to be looking after that sick lady and taking care of the household. Hers were certainly not the only pair of hands capable of serving her son-in-law and his friends. So why did she? We can't ask that question until we look closely at our second big fat Greek word of the day, the word that is translated serve. It's the Greek verb diakonai, which happens to be the same word Mark uses a little earlier in the story to describe how the angels waited on, served Jesus when he was in the wilderness. We'll bump into the verb again later on when Jesus tells his disciples that he came not to be served, but to serve. This verb is not just about serving a meal. It connotes a larger meaning of service, and another richer translation of it is to minister. Let's rehear those verses using that word. Jesus came not to be ministered to, but to minister. The angels ministered to him. And here, Simon's mother-in-law, in response to her second chance at life, began to minister to Jesus and the other disciples. She may very well have served them food, but it's about so much more than that. The act of ministering to someone implies noticing their needs and, to the best of one's ability, meeting them, which is what a disciple does. When Jesus took her by the hand, he did more than restore her to good health. In a sense, he ordained her as a disciple. In the same way that a minister is ordained by the laying on of hands to serve the people of a congregation, this woman was ordained by Jesus' own hands, resurrected to a life of discipleship. And her response is immediate. She ministers to Jesus and the other disciples, maybe showing them how it will be done. Of course, they don't understand. A few years later, near the end of Jesus' life, he will be on his final trip to Jerusalem with James and John, two of the disciples served in today's story. Now, by this time, Jesus will have told them not once but 3 times that his own death is imminent. And what do they ask him? If the 2 of them can sit beside him when he is on his throne of glory, one on his right and one on his left. That's the point where he will lecture them about the true meaning of discipleship, saying, "Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be a servant of all." For he came not to be served, but to serve. Were they surprised? Well, they shouldn't have been. It had been right there in the home of Simon Peter that they had been shown what discipleship looks like. It looks like a woman, the shine of the fever still on her brow, opening her eyes to see that there are people in her midst who have needs she knows how to meet, and rising up to minister to them. Maybe she held in her heart the sacred words of her faith tradition, the blessing God had given to their spiritual ancestor, Abraham. This is what God said to Abraham back in the 12th chapter of Genesis. "I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing." God's blessing is not given to one special person so that he can lord it over the rest of the world. God's blessing is meant to be shared with others as the one blessed blesses others in whatever way possible. We are blessed to be a blessing. In this story of Simon's mother-in-law, we see how it works. She is restored to health, resurrected even from her deathbed, and her response is to confer blessing on the first people she sees, her honored guests. Is it because Jesus has healed her? Perhaps, but she ministers to the others, and as far as we know, they were just standing there, mere props in the dramatic scene. Disciples minister to other people, even if they don't have to, even if they could easily come up with excuses why they shouldn't have to. Lord knows this woman had excuses. She had been sick abed with the fever for some time. Maybe she wanted to have a bath or at least change into a fresh nightie. She might have even been a little weak on her legs after the illness. Surely she could have remained where she was, right, and allowed someone else to do the ministering, maybe even bring her a nice bowl of broth while they were up. But that's not the point, is it? The point is Jesus heals people, not to show off his divine healing power, and not because it's just the right thing to do, but so that the ones healed can be brought back into society. Jesus will heal people with far worse conditions than a fever. People who live on the margins of society, the lepers, the demon-possessed, those who are not allowed to have a role in their community. How painful and isolating to not have a role in your community. The healing Jesus offers is not only healing of a physical ailment, but a full restoration back into the community life, into service of others. I have seen this happen in the lives of people I know. Maybe you have too. Someone who was on the edge, maybe in the throes of addiction or homelessness or despair or some other kind of sickness. But when that person is lifted up from that place that is not quite death, but also not quite life, that person begins to look around and minister to others, to find ways to serve fellow human beings and do real good in the world. A few years ago, I read the book Untamed by Glennon Doyle, in which she tells the story of feeling brokenhearted at the great suffering in the world. Having heard yet another news story that was too much to bear, her despair sent her to bed for the better part of a day. And when she rose, she got to work, and the result was an all-woman nonprofit organization called Together Rising, which has raised over $40 million since 2012. mostly in small donations of $25 or less, and this money is used to serve women and children in distress all over the world. Glennon was literally raised up from her broken-hearted despair in which life itself felt impossible, only to find a life-giving purpose, which is to lift one woman at a time, because when a woman rises, she brings her people up with her. That's their mission statement. To me, stories like this are the real miracles of life, and I think they get at the heart of today's Bible lesson, compelling each of us to wonder, from what have we been raised up? How have we been blessed? And what might our response to that blessing be? How might we use our blessing to bless others? Because the heart of discipleship is that, to take the gift Jesus has given us and to use it to minister to others. The healing we receive, the forgiveness, the life. To quote the words of a beloved poet, the late Mary Oliver, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What indeed? I would offer you now one of my all-time favorite hymns, the Servant Song. May it bless us all. Brother, sister, let me serve you, let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too. We are pilgrims on a journey, we're together on this road. We are here to help each other walk the mile and bear the load. I will hold the Christ light for you in the night time of your fear. I will hold my hand out to you, speak the peace you long to hear. I will weep when you are weeping, when you laugh, I'll laugh with you. I will share your joy and sorrow till we've seen this journey through. Blessings to you, dear friends, on your journey, and may God be with you until we meet again.